So, I'm going to start a new sermon series this morning. It's called These Beautiful Things, Finding a Faith Worth Loving. And in some ways it kind of parallels the book that I've been working on. But I have a little confession as I start this sermon, or I guess just something I want to kind of spill out there, which is that increasingly in my life I use the words beauty and beautiful in connection with my faith. But when I use those words, I often picture someone or kind of suspect that there are people out there who hear me use that kind of language, and they think that that kind of language is kind of too namby-pamby for a robust Christian faith, to talk about beauty and things being beautiful. By the way, when I thought about using that phrase, namby-pamby, I thought, maybe, I don't know where it comes from, maybe it's a bad phrase, and I shouldn't use it, so I looked it up. It has a kind of an interesting origin, which has nothing to do with my sermon. And the origin is that in the 18th century, that was a nickname given to an 18th century poet by his fellow poets who thought he wrote in an overly sentimental way. And it's actually a play off his name. And so then they started to revert to overly sentimental things as namby-pamby. But you know, a lot of the time what we do with Christian faith is we kind of conceptualize it as a set of beliefs, doctrines, truths, whatever you want to call it, or we think about it as a set of sort of moralisms, often that kind of make us feel good about how we're doing the moral thing and allow us to maybe judge other people who are doing the moral thing a different way. And when we think of Christian faith in either kind of more doctrinal terms or moralistic terms, it's interesting how the language of beauty evaporates from our faith. Now it's all about truth, and it's all about behaving properly, but somehow we're no longer talking about the beautiful things, like the beauty of God's heart, or the beauty within us, or the beautiful elements of human life like compassion or kindness, things like that. In fact, I would go so far as to say that across my now pretty long Christian journey, I have almost never heard other preachers or Christian leaders use the language of beauty in connection with Christian faith. I kind of joke, but I'm serious these days, that across all my years in church, the two words I almost never heard a preacher say were beauty and humanity. And today I'm like, we should be using those words all the time. But again, when we conceptualize the Christian faith in certain ways, language of beauty doesn't really have a place. In Dostoevsky's novel, The Idiot, which is a wonderful book, the character Prince Mishkin is derided for something he says that he dares to say out loud in the company of his friends. And the thing he says is this. He says, beauty will save the world. And I happen to believe, at this point in my Christian journey, that beauty is the only thing that's going to save the world. And what I mean by that is, underneath all the other stuff we talk about with Christian faith, and underneath all the stuff we go through in life, there's something deeper. There's something that is profoundly human, that in the midst of all the mess is the beauty that we were made for and that needs to happen to us. And apart from that, we might find religion and we might find moral compliance, but we won't find real life. And I don't want to overstate this or have it be off-putting for people, but we Christians, we talk about being saved. A lot of you know that language. We talk about when we got saved, we came to Christ, we got saved. Or we talk about salvation, which is a beautiful word from the scriptures. But I think a lot of times when we talk about being saved and we talk about salvation as Christians, we talk about it in a way that's too surfacey and mechanical, that doesn't really get down to the human parts of us that actually need rescue and restoration. The Pharisees come to Jesus and they ask him this question. You might remember this. They say, which is the most important commandment? They had ferreted out something like 613 commands out of the Old Testament. So they come to Jesus and they say, well, which one is more important? So you hear the question, right? The question is, what's the most important act we need to do to keep God happy with us? Right? You have your religion and your moralism all right there, and they say, so what is it? And they're expecting Jesus to say something like, keep the Sabbath, or don't wear a shirt made of two kinds of cloth, or whatever. One of those commands. Don't eat shrimp. Don't eat pork. What's the most important commandment? And Jesus surprises them because he says the most important commandment is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second one is like it. Love your neighbors yourself. I think it's very interesting to wonder about those. I don't think Jesus is saying, because when we think of commandments, we think of, here's the command or the order, and you comply, right? You're supposed to obey it, right? I don't think Jesus is saying, you better love God. Jesus is saying, you need to find the place where you can love God. Notice what the rest of it says. With all your heart and mind and soul and strength, where you can love. You need to see the beauty of God and be able to love this God with everything that's inside you. And then if you do that, you know what you'll be able to do? Be able to love your neighbor as yourself. Be able to treat people the way you would want to be treated. Relate to people the way you would want to be related to. And then I think of like the Apostle Paul in his Philippian letter. You know, Paul does this cool thing in his letters. When he gets to the end, he's always trying to figure out like, how can I get him to really like be centered in this beautiful God thing I'm telling them about? And he gets to the end of his letter and he says, so here's what you need to do. You need to reflect on, he's telling them this, you need to reflect on, and here's the quote. You need to reflect on those things that are noble, just, pure, and are you ready for this? Lovely. Lovely. You need to reflect on these things. So I'm really grateful for this whole Christian journey I've been on. You know, our journeys in life are kind of a weird thing because you grow into certain places, or hopefully you do, and you realize you're not at places you used to be. But I think the more you go along, you also realize you couldn't have gotten to the places you are without the journeys, even the weird parts that you took earlier on. You know, Richard Rohr talks a lot about that. He calls it transcend and include, or he'll use the phrase everything belongs. Like you might look back on your journey and say, man, I took some weird side roads. I did some stupid things. And yet they got you here, all those things, right? So there's a whole mystery to that. So I'm really grateful for all my journey that led me to this place. But I would also have to say that in recent years, my faith has evolved yet again in ways that I've rediscovered a faith that I would describe as being more beautiful. And so what I'd like to try to do over the next few weeks in this series is talk about some of the things we are known for talking about as Christians, some of the topics that are Christian topics, but wonder about them a little bit more deeply in connection with our humanity, so that we can find the beautiful things underneath that actually might do something transforming and beautiful to us. I know that sounds like a lot, like you're going to do all that in the next few weeks, we're going to figure it all out. I know it sounds like a tall order, but maybe we'll figure something out. I do have one word of caution as we embark on this series, and that is this. The pursuit of these beautiful things that God invites us into come with a price. And the reason they come with a price is because in order to go new places in your life, in your heart and your life, you often have to let go of things that you've had that have been with you before. That might be letting go of ideas you have, or ways you see things, or wounds that you've not really let God come in and heal, or ways that you maybe need to forgive somebody. Could be any of a million things. But oftentimes when Jesus says to us, hey, come this new place with me, we're like, well, but do I have to let go of this? And sometimes Jesus' answer to us is, well, yeah, you kind of do, because there's something better waiting. I would also, before we jump into this series, just suggest to you that I think the times we are in call for, and I hope you don't think I'm being too, I don't know what. I just think the times we're in call for a deeper Christian journey. I just don't think that we're going to be able to navigate the times we're in or survive them very well in our own souls if our Christianity is just, hey, I believe this, and hey, here's what it looks like to be good, or here's the good people and the evil people, or, you know, I think we've got to find, well, think of it this way. Jesus didn't come and say, hey, I want you to be better at this religious thing. And Jesus didn't come and say, I got a new set of rules for you to keep, right? In fact, he didn't have a lot of use for the purity codes, as I said last week. All the like, hey, here's all the stuff you got to, Jesus didn't have much use for that. Jesus comes and he says things like this. Just think about this. I've come that you might have life and have it to the full. that's something that's got something to do with something down here. That's not just whether I'm a good religious boy or whether I keep the rules or, and I think that these times, one of the things all of us, no matter what we think about the issues of these times, one of the things I think we should all be wondering as people of faith is, how can my faith be as deep, as beautiful, and as transforming as it can possibly be? So where do we start now that I've used half my sermon time just to introduce the series? I have a bad habit of doing that. I want to tell you a lot before the firing gun ever goes off, So I think I want to start this morning with the thing that many of us talk about most in our faith, which is just the realities around this idea of having a relationship with God. For many of us, our faith journey found its first steps because somebody said to us that we could have a personal relationship with God. I grew up in church, and there were people in my church, including my parents, who had a very personal and profound relationship with God, but I didn't know it because they didn't really talk about it that way. So I grew up in church, and it was just church and whatever. And then when I was, tender age of 15 years old, so people came into my life who started talking to me about this idea of that you can have a relation. They started talking about God this way, in this relational way. And it caught me off guard because I'd never heard that before. It was surprising to me, this idea. But it was intriguing to me, and I thought, and maybe you wondered is that really true? Can you really have a personal relationship with God? Now, a pastor friend of mine, quite a number of years ago, in a season where he was first discovering living out his faith in more social ways, like compassion and justice, which are huge, way up there in my faith these days. But when he was first discovering those things, he kind of thought it was an either or. So he was moving into all this kind of social justice stuff, and he started to say, like, all this stuff about a personal relationship with God, that's a bunch of hooey. And he was telling me all this one day, and he says to me, the phrase personal relationship's not even in the Bible. And I thought about that, and here's the problem with that. Is that all across the pages of Scripture, it's personal. God creates a man and a woman, and he puts them in a garden, and he names them. And then when it all goes to hell in a handbasket, he comes looking for them, and he calls them by name. Adam, where are you? Right? God calls a moon worshiper named Abraham, and he says, hey, I want to know you. Come take a journey with me. God woos a young boy named David on his shepherding hillsides, where David is out there playing his harp, and he's singing songs to God. His heart's alive to God. And then when David's a grown man and he's a king and he screws up everything, God calls him out for one simple reason. Because, David, I want you to be a man after my own heart. I'll call you out personally because I want you to become more whole. I want you to go this good place. Or just think about how we just came through the Christmas season, and we talk about, how God has become one of us in Christ. Think about this. So God ensconces himself in human flesh, shows up down here, if we want to call it that, and he has personal relationship with the wildest cast of characters we've ever seen. Everybody, from the religious to the irreligious, from the holy to the people that were considered unholy, to the common people, and it's personal. He goes to their houses for dinner. Can you imagine if you had dinner with Jesus and then later you kind of figured it all out, like who he was? You're like, so was that like God at my dining room table? But you see, it was personal. Or I think about the Apostle Paul. God confronts him on the Damascus road, Saul of Tarsus, who became Paul the Apostle. And he's out there, hunting down Christians and putting them in prison. He oversees the stoning of Stephen to death, first Christian martyr. God finds him on the Damascus road, calls him by name. He says, hey, Saul, why are you persecuting me? That's personal. And because he wants to awaken Saul to this better thing. Or I think of how the writer of Hebrews says, today if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts, right? So this is a God who relates to individual people, and it's personal. Now, I think the part we do sometimes forget, or that it took me a long time to realize, is God relates to us personally, always with an eye toward the communal. In other words, this is supposed to get changed, and this is supposed to get changed so that this can get changed, so that our relationships can be different, so that we can reconcile, so that we can walk together in love as human brothers and sisters. We do sometimes forget that part. When I think back to the beginnings of my own awareness of God and it becoming like a real relationship for me, it's really mysterious. Like, I still remember the first time I felt God's presence. I think I told you that story recently, and I was like, what is this, you know? And you know, you could argue that was just my mind or that was whatever, but I can picture like one of those first times I prayed when I came to connect with God. I could picture somebody coming up to me and saying like, do you really believe you're actually connecting with the God of the universe? Right? I mean, the universe is like, I watch all these weird videos these days of like where they start with like an atom, and then they show you everything that's bigger and bigger, and you get up to like elephants, and you get up to like skyscrapers, and then you get up to like planets, and then you get up to like galaxies, and it just keeps going out and out and out. And you realize that they don't even know how big the universe is. And you think you're here praying, and the God who fills all of that knows your name and is listening to you? And a lot of people would say it's presumptuous or that it seems highly unlikely, maybe. But if that's true, how is it then that I can stand up here this morning and bear witness to you to having experienced the kinds of things that these saints all across the pages of our scripture talk about? I have experienced the warmth of God's love, the presence of His Spirit, the voice and leading of God, the wisdom and strength that has helped me to keep going. Have you ever been at that place where you thought, I don't know if I keep going? I've been at that place a few times in my life. I was thinking the other day about this story. So Linda and I, when we were younger and our kids were little, we lived in this mobile home, which was pretty good except for the mice, probably. And the frozen pipes. We went without water in one half of it for an entire winter until But I was thinking about this, this goes to the point of like, sometimes we need strength beyond ourselves to go on. So we were in a very tough point when we were living there, and we were broke, and there were a lot of problems. And I had, just said to a friend of mine, we were standing in the driveway talking, and I said, if one more thing goes wrong in my life, and I was a strong Christian, right? I said, if one more thing goes wrong in my life, I said, I don't know if I can go on. And we were out in the driveway talking when I said this, and I sat down on the pavement and leaned my back against our car. So we had this car, we called it the Lehman Lemon. It was a 1978 Dodge Aspen station wagon, which had what was purported to be a great engine. You guys who know, Ron, you'll know this, Chrysler Straight Six 225, right? Great engine, except for the one they put in my car, right? So I said to my friend, if one more thing goes wrong, I'm going to lose it. And I sit down on the pavement and I lean against the car and I hear this sound. And it was the gas leaking out of my gas tank that had chosen to finally rust through at that moment. And I thought, I just don't know what to do. I don't have any money. Now I don't have a car, barely buy food for my family. Where do you find? But I can stand up here and tell you that every time I've been in that place, from somewhere this strength has come. And I have learned that when the going gets tough and I lean in to find direction from God, or I lean in to find strength, there's not nothingness there. There's something there. I can't completely explain that to you. God has helped me to see things about myself, about people, about life, about God that I didn't see before. Like, I can tell you that all this has happened to me. And the weird part is, this is the weirdest part, and probably only Richard Rohr and Henri Nouwen have given me any language for this. But sometimes when I've been in the toughest places of my life and I can't find one more thing to do, like there's just nothing left where that you know what you could do to fix it or change it, and you feel completely helpless, and you come to this place where you say, okay. And oddly, in all those moments, the presence of God has come to me. Almost as if God was saying, just fall into the freaking water, will you? and you will float. I can't explain that, but that's the reality in my life. And as many of you know, I and Linda, we're in one of those moments right now as we gather with you this morning. We just lost my mom, which it's a good thing in many ways. 98 and a half, a lot of pain. It's a good thing. My youngest brother we thought we were going to lose him 2 nights ago, and it's hard because he's 2,000 miles away. So every day I'm like, do I get on a plane today? And that's, we're close. Have you ever had an experience you can't get your mind around? I can't get my mind around it, And then there's other things going on in our family, extended family, that I won't talk about up here, but, and then we had a church flood, so that was like, oh, good. And I know in all this that I am not alone, first because of your love, but also because somehow this great loving presence finds me. I mean, if you can handle the vulnerability, I said this first service, and then I said I shouldn't have said that, so I'll say it again. This is the moment I'm in. I sat in my truck 2 days ago for a half hour, and I sobbed because of my brother. And I haven't sobbed in decades. I've wept, but not like that. But here's the thing. I knew that God was in that truck with me, weeping with me, and holding me. That's how I go on. So I share all this to say, if no one has ever really said it to you before, I want to bear witness to you this morning that God knows who you are. He knows who you are. He knows where you are. He knows the story of your life. More importantly, He knows the story of your heart, of your longings, your joys, your wounds, all those things. And He is determined to be a healing force, a healing presence in your soul with this great love, and to help you take this often painful and confusing, also beautiful human journey. And as audacious as it sounds, if that's new information to you, that the God of the universe loves you this personally, as audacious as it sounds, all that has to happen for that relationship to start is for you to crack open your heart a little bit and say to God, I want that too. Come find me. All God's waiting for is for you to say, I want more of a relationship with you. Come find me. You won't understand it at first, but God will come. Makes me think of Carol Jensen saying, just pray and ask Him. He's just waiting. He'll show up. I don't even know who I'd be today apart from this personal God. Now, there's one thing I have found rather perplexing along this journey as I've thought about it over the years. And it's not, I know what some people think. They think, yeah, how does God have this kind of relationship with billions of people? That I can't answer for you. God is God. I don't know. It's a mystery, No, my question is this. How does God manage to be so committed to us and give Himself to us so completely, even though we start out with almost all the wrong pictures of Him? And along the way, often take a very, very long time to get to better pictures of God. How does God do that? How does He? Because we're not like that, right? If people misunderstand us and misrepresent us, as we have often done with God, I know you never have, I have. If people do that to us, we distance ourselves from them, we get angry. We certainly don't look at someone who's misunderstanding us and misrepresenting us and say, how can I give myself to that person more completely? But God does exactly that with us. He's been doing it with me all across this journey. In Luke 9, there's a story of Jesus coming to a Samaritan village. But there was such a religious and racial rift between Jews and Samaritans that when they saw that Jesus and the disciples were Jewish, and Jesus starts talking about Jerusalem, the Samaritans say, forget about it, and they won't offer him any hospitality. There's no Fairfield Inn in the first century in these little Jewish villages, right? You have to stay in somebody's home and they have to feed you, and basically these Samaritans say, no, you're not coming across our threshold. And two of Jesus' disciples, James and John, they turn to Jesus and say, hey, you want us to call down fire from heaven like Elijah to burn these people up? They literally turn to Jesus and say, you want us to ask God to torch them? Now, I've often wondered, why did they think they had that power? I think it's because they just came off the transfiguration and they had seen Jesus and Moses and Elijah in all their glory, if you know that story on the hillside. So they're thinking oh yeah, there's power. So the Samaritans say, you dirty Jews, get out of here. And these guys say, hey, Rabbi, should we smoke them? And Jesus says to them, it says, what Luke says is, Jesus rebuked them, and he said, you don't have any idea what kind of spirit is driving you to have such garbage thoughts toward these people. But here's the astounding part of it to me. So Jesus rebukes them, full stop. He lines them out. And then Luke ends the story with these words. And then they went on to another village. Jesus doesn't say, I'm sorry, you guys, you just don't get it. So just you're not part of the group anymore. Forget it. We're done. Jesus is he corrects him, and it's, and then he says, all right, well, let's go find somebody that'll feed and house us. And he goes on, and that's really my question, is how does God do that? I mean, I'll give you another example. So, once upon a time, I choose to try to reconcile the God who in Jesus says, love your enemies, turn the other cheek, love your neighbor as yourself, with the God who in the Old Testament is purported to have said to the Jews, go in and kill all these non-Jews and make sure you don't leave any of their babies breathing. And I used to always say, and because what I was taught was, well, they're both in the Bible. And she said, okay. But I couldn't bring it together in my mind. It was always a tension point for me, right? Because if you can't picture Jesus, your New Testament says Jesus is the image of God and the radiance of his glory, the exact representation of his being. If you can't picture Jesus doing it, you can't picture God doing it, right? So I was always what do I do with that? So I don't really believe that anymore. I think that the early Israelites saw God as their own tribal warrior deity who was fundamentally for them and against everybody else, which is not that hard to believe because as religious people, we're still doing it today. Not just in Christianity, in lots of religions, where we say, based on our religion, we understand that God is for us and he's against all the other people, right? And so, it's not that amazing that they got some things wrong. What's amazing is that God did not reject them for it. He continued to walk with them. He continued to raise up prophets for them. He continued to reveal himself to them. I believe he revealed himself to them at a pace that an ancient Near Eastern, fairly violent tribal people could receive. Have you ever thought about that? If you lived in the ancient world, and it's you got your tribe over here, and on the other side of the hill, they got their tribe, and down in the valley, there's that tribe, and everybody's trying to survive, and your job is to kind of keep your territory, and that means killing a lot of the other people, and blah, blah, blah. And if God comes into that setting, although, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's not that much different from the world today. But if God comes into that setting and he says to you, hey, these people that want to kill you, love your neighbor as yourself. Turn the other cheek. I think the ancient Israelites would have been that's not really going to work. But of course, I think we say that today too. The Lord comes to us and says, hey, it's love. And we say, yeah, well, the world's not like that. It's not really going to work. We can't really. That's a great idea. Thanks for the tip. But it's amazing to me that God continues to walk with us in this relationship with all our mixed up ideas about him. I love the imagery that the pastor theologian Greg Boyd uses for this. He says that though we misunderstand God, and out of that we sometimes misrepresent God, what God does is he stoops down to meet us. He stoops down to accommodate our understanding. He doesn't validate it. He doesn't say all our mixed up pictures are okay. But he meets us where we are. And I love that because it explains my life. Think about it. If we had to see everything about God clearly before God would say, I'm going to give myself to you generously, God would just walk away from the deal right at the beginning. He'd say, you just don't get it, so I can't, Simi, you just don't have a good picture of me, so I can't give myself to you. And then we wouldn't be with God in this relationship, and we would probably never figure out God better than what we saw at the beginning. But God is merciful, and I don't think we're capable of this. God is. I think when God says love your enemies, we're like, that's a big request, He does it well. I think it's something we shoot for. But I really think that this idea of God accommodating, stooping, meeting us where we are, I think this is probably really one of the best ways we can understand the cross. God comes into the world and fleshed in the person of Jesus, and He's trying to teach people about what? Go read the Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus is teaching about having a right heart, about forgiving other people. He's teaching about, cultivating good motives within yourself. All of these different things. But neither the religious leaders or the state leaders comprehend this kind of God or this kind of love. And His love and His advocating for love makes Him their enemy, and they execute Him. I will tell you, and this is true today, if you are determined, first of all, within your own self to be a person who is capable of love and knows how to love, and then you become a voice for love, it will make you the enemy of some people. And it did with Jesus, and they killed Him because of it. But we know that the cross is God stooping down and meeting us where we are because of what Jesus Himself says on the cross. You remember what He says? He says, "Forgive them, Father, because they don't understand what they're doing." And so in a sense, God is always, we always think God suffered on the cross, and He did. God is always suffering with us because He's always suffering at the hands of our misunderstanding of Him, of our misrepresentation of Him. He is willing to suffer for us all the time in order to be in relationship with us, which is very good news because it means that God loves you and He wants to be close to you now, and it doesn't depend on you having it all figured out. Now, there's another part of this journey, which is that Jesus didn't just come and say, "Hey, I accept you, let's hang out." He actually came to change you, to change me, to restore you in ways that are fundamental to what it means to be a whole, free, and good human being. And so there is this whole journey Jesus talks about. So God is saying, I'm with you all the way. No reservations. I'll be with you today. I'm as close as your next breath. But He also says to us, however, there are some things you're not seeing. And you need to take this journey, a personal journey, from blindness to seeing better. I wish I had time to take you through all the places Jesus talks about this question of our blindness. But let's just try this one on for size from John chapter 9. Jesus says, "For this I came into the world, that those who are blind may see, and those who claim to see may have their blindness revealed to them." That's interesting. So what is it we need to see? My crass answer to that is about 1 million things. Things about the heart of God, about ourselves, about other people, about life as we've messed it up and life as it was meant to be. And I want to tell you something. Maybe you won't think it's that profound, but it matters to me. I remind myself of it often. Whether you've been on this journey a long time with this God who loves us, or maybe this is a lot of new thoughts for you, that's good too. I want to tell you what the thing is that will keep you, one of the biggest things that will keep you from seeing more about God, about you, about life, about your heart, about what life is supposed to be, about how to get out of some of the messes you've been in. One of the biggest things that will keep you from seeing more is this. Are you ready? Thinking that you already see well enough. And that's really a problem for religious people. thinking that we already see. A lot of us grew up in churches where it was the church that kind of said like, hey, the church knows and the church has it figured out, so you don't really need to ask any questions or dig around too much or wonder about things. Here's the answers. And the answers are usually, here's how to be religious and here's how to behave, right? Or many of us have journeyed in church communities or in spaces where we thought we had all the answers because we saw the Bible like a textbook, rather than what it is, which is a travel journal of people's encounters with the living God. That really helps, doesn't it? Because if it's a travel journal, if I'm writing in my journal, I could go visit Mount Rushmore and write in my journal all the wrong names of the guys up there on that hill. That doesn't change what's up there on the hill, but I might not get everything right in the journal. It's a travel journal. Here's what Jesus said about seeing. Your eye is the lamp of your body. If you are seeing well, your whole life will be full of light. But if your seeing is bad, your whole life will be full of darkness. Now here's the messy part. If what you think is light in your perspective is really darkness, how great is that darkness? In other words, if you've got ways you think you see, and you say, oh yeah, this is right. This is the light, this is the right way, but it's not because you're so convinced of it, Jesus says that's like double darkness to try to find your way out of that. One of my favorite things that Jesus says in that same set of passages in the Sermon on the Mount is he basically says, if you take this journey of relationship with me and this journey of receiving love and wondering what it's supposed to do to you, and if you take this journey of wanting to see more and see more and see more, you'll become different. You'll become good. You'll become loving. And then this is what he says that I love. He says, and then you will be children who reflect the love of your Father in heaven. That's amazing. Because that is what this relationship is about. So that as a human being, I can become more free from the stuff that's bound me. I can become more whole. I can get healed up from the garbage that's happened to me. And I can become, as my brother used to say when we were kids, more gooder. Father, thank you for loving us in relationship. And I know that's probably new for some people. But you have loved me well, and you have loved so many of my friends so well. And we have found ourselves journeying with you, and yes, having some kind of crazy personal communion with the God of everything. I just thought of that passage in Isaiah, Lord. When the rivers sweep over you, you will not be washed away. When the fires blaze, you will not be set aflame. I have carved you into the palms of my hands. I know you by name, and you are mine.